Okay, it's now 7 by my computer clock. It's 7:04, so I think we should get started. I'd like to open this meeting. It's Monday, August 15th, 2022. It's 7:04 p.m. And this is a virtual Zoom meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals, Town of Cohasset. So sitting as the Zoning Board of Appeals are myself, Woody Chidick as chair, Dave McMorris as vice chair, Matt Watkins, Lee Darst, and Mike Dickey, and Charlie Higginson will be joining us momentarily. Cassandra, do you have any way of maybe giving Charlie a buzz without things up or not? I don't want to mess things up.
I don't know if I have his number here because I'm at home. I think it's in the office. So, and I don't know that we should give his phone number out loud. So.
Okay. All right. No, he is in the book, but be that as it may, we shall await. Okay. So this is the Zoning Board of Appeals. We have 4 hearings, well, 3.5 hearings tonight. All of which are they're really sessions because all hearings are continued. The first of which is 49 Border Street, filed by Peter and Carolyn Wariski to raise a 2-family dwelling and reconstruct a dwelling. They have, I understand, Cassandra requested a continuance. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
I'm just curious, was any reason given or just requested? I mean, they didn't need a reason, but.
Off the top of my head, I'm sure they gave a reason, but I think that they needed time to go over the plans and whatnot in lieu of what happened at the last meeting.
Which is fine. And just apropos of this, before it comes to vote, I had asked after our last meeting if the neighbor Massa, I guess Dawn Massa, could give us a copy of her presentation so we could review it. I haven't seen that. Is there a link or something we could?
There is an electronic copy. I didn't include it in the packet email for this month since it was getting continued and I didn't want to bog down the attachments, but I do have it to send out to everyone.
All right. It's my recollection is it's fairly lengthy, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, at any rate, the applicant has requested a continuance until our September meeting. What are they, or is it indefinite?
I believe it was the September meeting.
September meeting. Okay. So, any discussion, or would the board agree to continue this hearing until our September meeting, which is, well, we'll come to it. A date certain in September. We'll decide at the end. Comments?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to continue it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd make a motion to continue this hearing until our September meeting. Motion's made.
I'll second it.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Woody Chidick, aye.
Dave McMorris, aye.
Right. Anybody else like to?
Lee Darst, aye.
Okay.
Michael Dickey, aye.
Matt Watkins, aye.
Okay, so it's moved in to September. The second one is a special permit that's been before us a couple of times now by Thomas Reardon, who wants to construct a small pool, a portion of which is within the floodplain, the 50-foot buffer zone. This is on 46 Hobart Lane. What did we did get something new? Does the applicant there? I see a site plan done by the Cavanaro consulting firm and a kind of a sketch, a hand-drawn sketch by Sally Weston Associates Architects. Is the applicant present to explain what's new and what isn't? No, yes. They don't have to explain what isn't.
Yeah, so I'm going to pull them forward.
Okay, if you're promoting Sean, he's muted. And Brendan Sullivan is muted.
Yep.
But,
Sorry about that.
okay.
Evening. Brendan Sullivan here.
Off, Brendan?
I'm sorry?
Are you leading off here?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, great.
And I'll be brief. I think the only thing wrapped up here was the issue with the pool being the close proximity to the house. And we resolved that when speaking with John Hallen, that so any foundation construction within 10 feet of the pool is going to be slab construction. So there'll be no foundation wall, no basement within 10 feet of the pool. And I've spoken with John about that. And so that's what the revision of my site plan was just that within 10 feet of the pool will be a slab construction, and Sally submitted a foundation plan such as well.
Okay, so that's what I see. Okay. Questions on the part, does Sean or Tom Reardon have anything to add to that?
No, I really don't. I was just on here because we also have our landscape plan, which you guys have had in your possession for a while. So
Yeah.
I'm here for questions, and I was
Okay,
pool decision or pool discussion also. So that's it. Thank you.
okay, board,
Nothing to add as well.
okay,
I had a question
go ahead.
for Matt. Matt, did you get a chance to see this before you did your draft?
I did, yep.
Okay,
I included that in there.
okay, great.
And I think maybe Brendan, did we, just for the file more or less, did we ever get the stormwater permit? I know you got that from Conservation Commission. Did you send that over to Cassandra so we'd have it for our files?
Geez, I don't know if I did or not, but I can. I'm sorry if I did not. But we have that in possession. But I can forward that over to you for the file.
Okay.
Stormwater and do you want the conservation order conditions as well?
Yeah, I think if we could have both, that'd be great. We'll just
Yep.
have it with the file.
I'll
Thank
get those over to you.
Okay.
Okay, any questions of Brendan or others from the board?
I don't have any.
Comments? Well, we do have a draft to discuss later on. I'd make a motion to close the hearing with the in the absence of any new material.
Second,
Okay, moved and seconded to close the hearing. Woody Chidick, aye.
Dave McMorris, aye.
Lee Darcey.
Michael Dickey, aye.
Matt Watkins, aye.
Great.
Okay, so that hearing is closed, and later on tonight, we will take a look at a draft that Matt Watkins has prepared and discuss it accordingly. Now, the next one, we're moving a little bit quickly here. Next one's 103 Border Street, filed by John and Kathy, I guess, thought it was Ted and Kathy, but Lubitz to raise and reconstruct a single-family dwelling that basically butts up against the Gulf River. Who is here for the applicant? And I'm trying to think, I'm getting a little bit concerned about given Charlie and 46 Border Street, given that we're approaching the end, and if the applicant on this one could wait just a second. I'm wondering if Charlie's telephone number is published in the phone book. The Rotary phone book. Does that make it problematic to read what's in the phone book?
But
Oh,
if it's
wow.
in the phone book, it would seem to me it'd be public information, right? Public information wouldn't have any kind of confidentiality risk to it.
Yeah, it would be public.
Okay, well, let me give you
All
the
right.
number, Cassandra. It's and it is a number that they pick up. I know that much. It's 781-383-9427.
Okay, I
And
will.
while we're dealing with 103 border, if we can find out if Charlie's on, able to log in or is having a problem, that would be helpful.
Okay, so I will give Charlie a call. So I'll just pop off for a second.
Okay. So I guess Attorney Adam Brodsky is representing the applicant, and if you could talk to us about, we had one submission, as you know, Adam, it's a site plan revision prepared by Cavanaro Consulting. You may have other issues as well that you'd like to raise, but maybe we could, I wasn't exactly sure what was new in this site plan. Maybe you could help elucidate that.
My pleasure, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone. Adam Brodsky and I represent Katie and Ted Lubitz. Ted's legal name is John, which is why it appears on the application.
Okay, well, you learn
And-
something all the time. Okay.
I did a poor job of answering Mr. McMorris's questions regarding the floodplain. So I asked Cavanaro Merrill to update the site plan with just two pieces of additional information. First, to confirm the location of mean high water, which was coincident with the seawall, as I believed when we last met. And second, I asked them to confirm that the proposed house will be located above 10 mean sea level. 10 mean sea level is 9.2 NAVD. This site plan uses the NAVD datum, and the basement slab elevation is well above 9.2 NAVD at 10 NAVD. So I just wanted to confirm those two pieces of information. Otherwise, I have no additional information to provide to the board, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Dave, have you had a chance to look at the site plan?
No, but those are that's what I suspected the answer would be. And just thought for purposes of our decision, we needed to have that information.
Okay, do we have any other issues that are still on the table? I'm asking the board itself and Cassandra if she knows of any, but
I came in the middle of that conversation, so.
okay. So we're at 103 border, and Adam had a slightly revised site plan before us, but really to confirm where the mean high water is and where the structure is relative to the mean high water. It appears to be above 10 feet. Anybody else, any other issues?
I had prepared a draft decision, and I think my recollection is those were kind of the only outstanding issues.
Okay. And because I'm just back, is your draft decision, was it sent to the board, or is that still waiting for this piece of data?
No, I sent it to Cassandra, and I think Cassandra circulated it to the board members a
Okay.
little while ago.
I'm going to apologize then.
You don't have to apologize. Woody, you went off to Italy for 2 weeks. We're all jealous.
Well, I don't know. I guess so, but I kind of dropped the ball here. Any rate, so if Mike is satisfied, as a board, got any other questions or issues with this application at this point, short of a deliberation, but any more data needed? Appears not. I'd make a motion to close the hearing on 103 Border Street.
Second thought.
Moved and seconded. Woody Chitik, aye.
McMorris, aye.
Lee Darcey.
Michael Dickey, aye.
Matt Watkins, aye.
Okay, so that's been closed, and we will deliberate on that, I believe, later on this evening.
Thank you.
Now, the last hearing has been going on for, I guess, since April. It was filed in March, but we've had successive meetings. It's 46 Border Street, seeking maybe 3 at least 3 special permits for restaurant and retail uses in the waterfront business district. This is otherwise known as the former Atlantica restaurant site. And we got 3 submissions between our July hearing and tonight. And I sent some thoughts, and I tried to sort of compare what the issues seem to be, both raised at our July hearing and in a letter really too late, submitted too late to be thoroughly analyzed or addressed. It's a letter from neighbor David Fulton and a number of other signatories, and that one is dated August 12th. I took the liberty of sending a little thought piece or a little summary to the board and to Cassandra and Carolyn. But I, again, I'm not expecting everybody to have even received that email. It didn't go out until close to 6 o'clock tonight, 5:30 or something. So at any rate, we can talk about what's new and what was submitted. And also, if David Fulton is in line, after we deal with the applicant's representatives and our own questions, we can invite Mr. Fulton to talk. I think some of his issues are issues that we've already explored, as he said in the cover note, and some are slightly different or amplified. So I consider it new material.
Woody, it might be, I've looked through some of this material. As you said, that they applied for special permits on 3 different provisions. Can we review what they were, what those provisions that they're seeking the special permit for are? Because I think it's good to remind ourselves what the extent of the jurisdiction is here.
Okay, and Adam, you will want to include in this conversation, I think, a synopsis of your August 8th memorandum regarding section 9.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you like me to begin?
Sure.
Thank you.
I know it's early, but we don't, we have that caveat that times are simply estimates, and you also happen to be here. So
Yes, sir.
that's convenient.
Before Adam speaks, I'm sorry, Adam, I don't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to give an update. I did call Charlie. It went to voicemail, so I left him a message, but there is no update there.
Okay,
than that.
thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have other members of the team who are available. While I think Mr. O'Mara is traveling, I don't know whether Mr. Sullivan, who's the manager of Co-Lobster, is on the call. I do know that Susan Hoadley and Karina Martinez, our architects, are available. And I believe that both Darren Grady and Gabriel Padilla are not attending. So Susan and Karina will be our technical experts. And let me try and answer Mr. McMorris's questions before I address the August 8th letter. In our submittal, we essentially asked for relief on 3 things. 1, a special permit for the uses, because the restaurant within this zoning district and the other uses have to be approved by special permit. In fact, there may have been 4 special permits that we asked for. Second, a general special permit if we needed it for an extension of the non-conforming uses. Third, because we were originally proposing to continue the non-conforming parking configuration, we had requested relief for that. But as I mentioned, I believe at the last hearing, I don't think that that is required any further because the parking has reconfigured to conform. And lastly, authorization under the floodplain bylaw. So those are generally the categories of relief that we were seeking. And as I suggested, I do not believe that we need that relief for the parking. You had asked me at the last public hearing to specifically address floodplain zoning. Mr. Chittick had asked me to address 309.7H in particular, 1 and 2. And I wrote to the board on August 8th. And it very well may not be necessary for the board to even address the special permit uses under section 309.7H, because I suggested 2 other ways of looking at it. And this is very helpful for me because oftentimes floodplain zoning is a secondary consideration. We're often talking about other issues. So this was helpful for me to go through and review the bylaw in detail. First, I raised the question of whether a special permit is necessary because under section 308.2A, it requires a special permit if there's an expansion or an abandonment of a non-conforming use or structure. And I focus on the word expansion. As you well know, in this particular instance, there's no expansion or abandonment of either the building or the use. In fact, with respect to the structure itself, it's being reduced in size. So if you strictly construe your sort of general special permit requirements for non-conforming uses and structures, it raises the question as whether or not relief is actually required. But there's another section of the floodplain bylaw that I took a look at, which is the special permit for alteration of the non-conforming uses of building or land under section 309.11. And I did not address this in our original application. I always default to special permit uses. That's often what we're dealing with here. But obviously, it's not an instance where we're raising an entire structure and reconstructing it. We're proposing improvements to an existing structure. But I find that 309.11 is a bit confusing to me because it's entitled, extension of non-conforming use. But then in the body of the bylaw, it talks about the non-conforming use of a building. And so the bylaw itself speaks to both non-conforming use, but also includes dimensional requirements. So I'm often, often we talk about non-conformities with respect to use or structure. I think 911 can be read to apply to a non-conforming use, but also to a non-conforming structure within the floodplain district. And the words use and structure, I think, may be used interchangeably here. I don't know how the board has dealt with this issue in the past, so I wish I had more experience with this. But it suggests to me that because, again, we're not increasing the ground area coverage of the building, which is the dimensional trigger within 309.11, that perhaps a special permit for the alteration of this non-conforming structure within the floodplain district would be the more appropriate section of the bylaw to grant a special permit. Coming back to where we started, I try my best to address the special permit uses under 9.7H1 and number 2. And I'll just be brief, at least in the information that's available to me, that while the property is in the floodplain, there's no historic evidence of, and this is the phrasing from the bylaw, damage by flooding or waves. Similarly, the building improvements will be flood-proof. I should also say that we're proposing stormwater management BMPs, which comply with the stormwater standards. So I think we've demonstrated that that the building has not historically been subject to damage by flooding or waves, and the land is not unsuitable, again, to maintain the existing structure with the improvements, which addresses item number 1. We've made it clear that the land here is subject to tidal action and is in fact below 10 mean sea levels, about 8.4 mean sea level. However, section 2 of the bylaw relates to proposed structures, and I respectfully suggest that that it relates to the construction of a new proposed structure within the floodplain. And as you well know, we're not proposing a new structure within the floodplain. We're simply making improvements to an existing structure. And so I suggest that 9.7H2 may not be relevant to these particular facts. So I think we satisfy one, but that 2 is likely not relevant because it appears to me the intention is to deal with construction of a new structure within the floodplain, which is not what we're doing here. Again, however, I mean, we are improving flood resiliency, again, by using flood proof materials for the improvements, as well as installing stormwater BMPs to manage stormwater where at present there's minimal stormwater management. So I think if the board thinks it's more appropriate to grant relief as a special permit use under 9.7, I think we have addressed all of those factors, and the board can make a reasonable decision on those issues. So that was my deep dive into floodplain zoning. I'm sure you have some questions. I'll do my best to answer. I think that was the only additional information that we were asked to provide. And in fact, the board had suggested that perhaps it may be ready to consider a decision and conditions. Ms. Thayer was kind enough to provide me with a copy of the letter from the abutters. I think that some of the conditions proposed by the abutters are very similar to the conditions that Mr. Chittick, the chairman, had outlined, which are agreeable to the applicant. Some of them are not, and some of them are far beyond the jurisdiction of the zoning board, but we can address those if and when the board wishes to hear from us.
Why don't we take section 9 first, and then, do it in pieces rather than.
Yes, sir.
Take it. The support. What is the thinking on the part of the board? A is relief not needed under section 911 because it does deal with not just uses, but use of a building, structure, or land. So it would possibly apply, other than the fact that it deals with increases. And as Mr. Brodsky has pointed out, this structure is being reduced, not increased. So that's one issue. And the other issue is, I don't know whether that provision exempts section 9.7H from applying or not. Points of view? Dave, why don't we start with you as our stalwart vice chair?
I think the point is well taken that there's not an addition or enlargement or restoration. And I also agree that that bylaw is really badly written when it refers to uses and then immediately starts talking about buildings and structures.
I think we should probably ignore the heading, which is not really the body of the bylaw, and I think you're right. It applies to building structures and uses.
Mm-hmm.
But having said that,
yeah, I don't see construction, movement, or placement of a building, a structure, filling, excavation, changing in grade. None of those things are activities that are part of this application, unless you use construction in a very expansive context. So I'm not sure that 9.7H is really is really something that's we need to consider here. 9/11.
We deal with 9/11, you know, 3 or 4 times a year, but we haven't had, I'm trying to think of a situation where we've had something that has reduced a building or use as opposed to expanded it. And so
Right.
I'm not sure that really applies.
I'm not sure it does either. And I mean, my problem is I'm having a hard time finding which section does apply. None of them seem to fit directly. There's some kind of tangential
I,
concern, but I don't see that the bylaw really addresses what's happening here.
but how do other board members take, you're back on 97H, Dave, I think, right?
Yeah, 97H and 9/11. I just don't, neither of those fit clearly to the project that's in front of us.
Well, 97H, in my estimation, applies, is closer than
I agree.
9/11.
I agree, it's closer.
I don't think they need relief under 9/11 at all because they're not increasing by more than 300 square feet or 20%. So they don't need relief there, but I don't know about H1 and 2, which deal with, damage. Adam has said he's not aware of any damage in the past by flooding or waves. I've never studied, I've never been there during a big storm, a northeaster, so I don't know. And
But I would wonder, like, by implementing 97H1 and 2, I mean, it's almost an encouragement to, to make him, they're not making any impacts based on, what they're proposing, right? And
right.
I think that's a good thing versus
Yeah, I mean,
if you studied this too closely and said, well, geez, if they have to comply with this, the result of it would be additional impacts within the floodplain. So it kind of makes you feel better about the proposal,
yeah, making it less subject. It doesn't deal with relativity, but certainly what they've proposed would make this slightly reduced structure less subject to damage by flooding and waves.
That's true, but this project can never meet subsection 2.
Yeah,
Because it's never going to be less than 10 feet above.
it is what it is.
It is what it is. And it kind of goes back to the beginning of that, where it says other construction, movement, placement of the building. It obviously is contemplating something new going into that floodplain. And here, nothing new is going into the floodplain. What's there is there. So, I mean, it can't ever meet number 2, but I'm not convinced that it has to. And certainly, it wouldn't make any sense to apply 97H2.
Yeah, it doesn't give you an exemption at all for something that's pre-existing and is not changing.
Right, I think the lead into that about the construction, movement, placing, et cetera, filling, excavation, changing and grade, those are all alterations to whatever it is in the floodplain. And this is not, it changes the elevation or changes the impact in the floodplain. None of these things that are proposed here have anything to do with that. It's just what's already there. It's actually getting reduced, but there's no other changes to the floodplain being made.
Other board members? please speak up. I mean, you know, I think as Dave's pointing out, we'd all like some of these sections and subsections to be crystal clear. This is one that isn't. Its intention may be different than the wording, but not for us to.
I don't have any comments. I think it's difficult to use any of those sections. It's like round pegs and squares, so.
Square peg in a round hole, maybe?
Square peg in a round hole, yes, trying to fit things in. So I agree that, I agree with everything that you and David and Matthew have said.
Mike, what's your take on this? You're muted though. Mike, you're muted. Unmute.
Yep, sorry about that.
Okay.
I was actually had the bylaw up on the screen, so apparently I can't unmute while I am looking at the bylaw. But I gotta say, this is so complex, and I'm not sure the drafters really address this type of an issue, which sometimes happens, you know. So I think we probably have a little bit of leeway to interpret things in a manner that we think you know, makes sense, given the you know, our best understanding of what the intent of the drafters were when they put this opaque bylaw together.
I think a lot of these floodplain bylaws were either adapted or just put verbatim from FEMA model bylaws that towns had to pass in order to be qualified for flood insurance. And they're not really a one-size-fits all bylaw, and that a lot of this sort of thing creeps into them, I think.
Let me ask Town Council Carolyn Murray if she has a point of view in this one.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you that these subsections don't appear to be written for this particular circumstance. If you look at section 300-9.6A, it is pretty clear that 9.6A.
Okay.
So in a floodplain or watershed protection district, no building or structure shall be constructed, used, erected, altered, or otherwise placed or moved, and no land shall be filled, excavated, and changing grade, etc., except pursuant to a special permit, as hereinafter provided. So I think it leaves open, I mean, clearly this is going to be a building that is going to be used, even though perhaps it is not being enlarged, but it is going to be used. I agree that I don't think section 9.7H fits the bill exactly, but neither does 911. You know, we are not extending, enlarging, restoring a non-conforming use. So I think lacking, you know, more specific criteria, I think we should default to the extent that we can to 9.7H. And it may very well be that not all of this criteria, you know, the 5 criteria listed there are applicable. And we can certainly make findings that they're not applicable. But I think this is something that we should refer to our zoning bylaw committee to look at in the rewrite process.
It has
to look
certainly
at
given us
criteria or
trouble in
tweaking,
the
cleaning this
past.
up. Mhm.
Yeah. You could in fact, I don't want to get us off track, but in fact, you could say that if I'm building a dock, a walkway out to Little Harbor, let's say, and the proposed use and structure is less than 10 feet above mean sea level, it has to be at some point. if I'm going to, get to the ocean at all or the waterway, it's kind of silly because the use of the dock or something of that sort is to ultimately be below 10 feet. That doesn't mean it's inappropriate. So
Right.
I would agree. I think our finding probably in this specific instance should be that it's not relevant, it's not applicable, rather than come through some tortuous, explanation of why something that is below 10 feet means sea level is really above it. I mean, that's stretching too far. So I don't know, that's personally, I don't have any qualms about saying that a couple of those provisions do apply in this, but number 2 doesn't. I think the application meets the others, at least from a relative standpoint. If you're making something better or less subject to damage, that's, to my estimation, good, as opposed to disqualifying the entire project.
I mean, frankly, you could never use this building again.
Yeah,
Makes no sense at all.
yeah. So if the board is comfortable with that, we could move on to maybe the more substantive issues that have been raised. And I didn't think, in fact, to copy Adam, and I should have. I was rushing right before. Adam, I did a little kind of a cheat sheet. What's been submitted to us? What are some of our issues and concerns that remain? What's being addressed, and also of these issues and concerns that remain, where does the Fulton neighborhood come out? I think some of these issues that I have are not necessarily those of the neighborhoods. Maybe we could deal with those first, and then, as I suggested later on, loop back to the Fulton memo and see what's already been discussed, or if the board has lingering concerns. But if it's already being taken care of, we don't need to belabor the point. I think he's raised a couple of issues that I honestly have not thought about and we haven't discussed. But let me ask you first, and I'm not trying to be cute on this, but the Grady Consulting on August 10th gave us a revised site plan. And their estimation of, and I presume this is the applicants in your position, that on the nighttime usage, which is 5 p.m. to 10 p.m., 42 spaces are required, not 32. Now that's a change from July. And it's I don't think it was a slip of the pen. So is your position now that 42 spaces are required for this site?
That includes the 10 you wanted to add offsite.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Chairman, that Mr. Sullivan obviously answered your question.
Okay, I didn't know if it was 10 plus, it's increased by 10 plus another 10. Okay, I understand.
No, sir, that was our agreement to
Yeah,
secure 10 additional parking spaces for employees offsite, for which we
personally, I'm fine with that.
condition.
I haven't heard from the board necessarily, all of them on that, but just so I understand. Okay, so it's now 42, some of which will be accomplished offsite. Okay, that wasn't clear from the site plan, but we can kind of move right over that one. Let me start at least with some of the, I'm calling them caveats or whatever, but many of them relate to the existing bylaws. The first of which is, I would propose, and I want to know if this is satisfactory to you or not, that given what section 7.2 has to say about loading and unloading activities, that nothing happened on this site until all operations are closed, and I'm not counting cleanup and things like that. But in other words, loading and unloading, haul away, whatever is takes place 10 p.m. up to 7 a.m. when patrons are expected to be using this site. 7.2 speaks against having loading and unloading activity taking place in designated parking spaces. You comfortable with that? Would you agree that's what the bylaw intention is?
Mr. Chairman, I don't disagree what the intention of the bylaw is from an operational point of view. I don't know if that's feasible. I don't have that expertise. I don't know whether Mr. Sullivan or Ms. Holly or Ms. Martinez can speak to that, but
No, I wouldn't say that's feasible because someone would have to be there. So it would be during those hours. And I would think the neighbors would prefer not to have trucks there at night and so forth. It could be done. During the day, there should be plenty of space, and I don't see that many deliveries happening anyway, but I don't think it'd be feasible to do at night. I mean, if we had to, I guess make do with that, but
Right. I'm not suggesting that, well, I agree that it would be a little probably unpleasant for the neighbors to have some truck come in at midnight or two in the morning and rattle around.
backup, they have the backup ringers and all that stuff. That would be more obnoxious than just coming in and out.
How does the board feel about, I mean, I don't know if there is a ready solution, but to be compliant with 7.2 so that loading and unloading activities don't interfere with patron parking.
Well, it seems to me that unless this is the most successful coffee shop we've ever seen, they're not going to be using all those spaces during the pre-restaurant hours.
Yeah, I mean, if they come at, 9:30, 10:30, that's what I would think. I would think that the early morning pre-7 and post-10 would be more of an impact to the neighborhood and not something that would yield success there. I think to rely on them to coordinate appropriate delivery times during those hours. I mean, I think we've heard from the applicant that it doesn't benefit them to have a patron pull up and there to be 3 delivery trucks taking up all the parking spaces. So I think they'd want to be smart about what time they come to, but I would be careful about the pre-7 and post-10 for the neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that the applicant is facing, and so are we, is that we have no real world experience with this particular operation. Some of this discussion is hypothetical. For all I know, the coffee shop has sort of a fluctuating patronage as well, and maybe at 10 or 11, for all I know, they nobody's coming in for coffee until I just don't know. But I'm sure it can be juggled. But for us to set a particular time might be kind of frivolous, I think. So that doesn't worry me a lot, but I would put the applicant on notice that if some satisfactory solution can't be worked out, and that may come to later on a traffic management study, which we did discuss to deal with. But at this point, I would say it could be a problem. Fix it by adjusting the delivery hours to low usage times of the day, and that's to everybody's interest. I mean, if it's not if it doesn't result in a problem, then the problem goes away. Anyway, I don't know. We can talk unless somebody has angst. But a second point came up, and that is that because we have to, as Adam knows, and everybody knows, we're going to abide by the plans as submitted. And one of the, it's nice to talk about 7 a.m. opening and 3 p.m. closing. I'm not at all sure that that applies to the delivery of lobsters. Not all lobstermen are in secured before 3 o'clock. I know that because I use the harbor, 3 or 4 times a week, and I did talk to the harbor master who said sometimes lobstermen come in with their catch at 5 and 6 in the.
Well, I think that pertained mostly to the coffee shop and the restaurant being open at the same time.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. No, I'm just wondering if the 3 p.m. closing would be an unintended consequence and would screw up the lobster pound.
Well, I think it would, from my understanding, that would apply to the coffee shop. The lobster wouldn't take up any, they.
Well,
back-
I'm not arguing. I'm not arguing that it would, but I'm saying that the way the plans have been presented to us, the lobster pound is included in that 3 p.m. closing, and you may not want to apply that closing hour to a lobster pound.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It should, because one, it's, I think they have they have a loading zone. So if a lobsterman came in, backed up and unloaded the lobsters and left, but yeah, I would apply it only to the,
Yeah, well, your plans can be altered, the drawings or a reference point or memo or whatever can make that clear.
okay.
I'm just pointing out that you wouldn't want to find out 6 months later that you've shut down the lobster fleet.
Yeah, no, that makes
Without
sense.
intending to. I think we agree that 10 employee/customer parking spaces will be achieved with plans yet to be submitted, but understand all this is short notice. Off-site, off-street parking is going to solve that. The other two things we did talk about a little bit is the post-occupancy traffic impact study. I believe the board expressed a kind of a unanimous opinion that we would like to do, kind of have that be done roughly a year after it's open for, these businesses are open. But to certainly encompass a full summer season. So it could be done maybe in a 6, 7, 8 month timetable, depending on when the building opens, or it might take 12 months to get through a full summer. But we want to sort of have a traffic impact study done capturing what appears to be the busiest season. That's all. And also, if regardless of the outcome of that traffic impact study, if there emerges a pattern of complaints because people, we have traffic problems, the police department or others are saying there's a safety issue here, the zoning board would reserve the right to order another traffic study down the road, no pun intended, down the pike. But we can't anticipate when or even if that will ever be necessary. So one traffic study for sure, we reserve the right to have more if there seems to be a continuing problem. But not just arbitrarily. I mean, we're not going to just have a timetable, but an ongoing timetable, but only if it appears needed. Is that acceptable to you, Adam, first, and then the board, or do you have anybody in the board have issues with that?
Mr. Chairman, that was acceptable when you raised it at the last hearing.
Okay. And of course, the last caveat, board, are you okay with that? Well, there's more language that we'll put around it, but that's the essence, that's the meaning of that. It may go on a few more lines. It'll be a study conducted by the planning, under the auspices of the planning department, but paid for by the applicant. Okay, and the last caveat, it may seem obvious, but because the plans have changed so much and there's so much detail here, one condition would be no further changes to uses, seating requirements and or operating hours can happen until there's a new public hearing for modification of a special permit, making the assumption that this board does issue a special permit to operate. That what's frozen in time in place are the plans submitted. Doesn't mean you can't modify or change them, but it does mean that the applicant and or his successors would have to come before the board to explain any impacts. But that just is pretty obvious to me, but
Yeah,
and rather, so Adam, I guess, are you comfortable with that? Rather blanket?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a statement of the current law, which is that we
Okay.
could not make any modifications to a special permit without the board's express permission.
Right. Okay. Board, are you comfortable with those?
Yes.
Carolyn, is anything I've said inconsistent with bylaws or other things?
No,
Okay. I take it you say,
that's all consistent with what we either discussed before or what,
yeah, is it
you know,
consistent
or the
with
provisions of the
what,
bylaws.
yeah, or is it any of it inconsistent with what the bylaw allows us to do? I don't think it's.
No, it isn't.
inconsistent. Okay. Well,
No,
that's sort of where we've come out from a board, and now 2 days, and David Fulton acknowledged that this was his memo, 3-page memo, was too late in the game for it to be adequately discussed. So I would propose that we might talk about some of his conditions tonight, but continue the hearing for probable closure next month in the event that there are second thoughts or we need more thought per se. But with your indulgence, I'll just read at least my summary of what his memo said and how it might relate to the thinking that's this board has had up to now. He wants to restrict food service uses to 2, which might include a future ice cream shop or a bar or something. I think the no further changes to uses, seating and operating hours kind of takes care of that. Because I think if there were a future ice cream shop, to pick on that, it would have to come before the board and we'd have to understand its impact. But to be specific and say no ice cream shop, I think goes too far. It says never. And I have no earthly idea what if anything might be down the road. Trouble is, if you get too specific, you create loopholes.
Well, that and it's not our role to tell people how to run their business.
Yeah,
Got certain things that we're supposed to pay attention to, which I think we've done a good job of. And I don't want to be wandering outside of what we're here to do.
and is next, and I'm going in the order of his memo. He's suggesting a maximum of 1 liquor license for the entire property. I don't think liquor licenses, of course, fall within our purview. And if a second liquor license were ever to be issued by the town, the impacts would have to be again covered in this change in use or aspect. So I don't see limiting 1 liquor license makes much sense, particularly since there would be 2 sites as proposed serving liquor inside in the summer and outside under the covered wharf. That would be kind of equivalent to having 2 liquor licenses, but a single operation. So I think that again kind of goes too far. He then gets into parking, valet parking. He's suggesting May to September. including stacked parking. That's an interesting idea. But basically, I don't see what's so magic about May to September. We could have overloads anytime, any month of the year. And it would, obviously, I think the applicants would like to make sure that there isn't sort of a shutdown in October, for instance, because of an overload. So I would just say that our requirement for 10 off-site parking spaces applies year-round rather than May to September. And he's suggesting 12 employee parking spaces off-site May to September. I won't get back into the May-September thing, but and we will hear from him in a moment or two. I'm not sure about the rationale for 12 spaces. I think it's well, we can hear from him. He also wants to have a whatever he calls it, a TDM, transportation something study. I'm not familiar with transportation demand management. I think we've already covered that. Bike parking, which he's suggesting, has not been discussed, and we should discuss that. I haven't given much thought to bike parking. Interesting idea. He suggests a traffic monitoring study, kind of once the operation is underway, but we've already covered that.
I think pretty sure we have bike parking in our plan.
Okay, and if so, then maybe that's covered. Well, let me mention a couple of other things, and we'll come back to bike parking, because and you can point it out to us, or somebody can point it out to us in the site plan as submitted. Fine dining capacity, he's talking about basically a trial period, first year trial period, 7 seats. They can come back to the ZBA 12 months later to request an expansion. I don't know where the 70 seats came from. It's obviously less than 96, but that doesn't enlighten me too much. And I don't know what standards are being suggested that we apply 12 months hence were we to adopt that. I would think a lot of that would be covered by the transportation study rather than a number of seats. He doesn't want to see, or he and his neighbors, no bar outdoors or on the deck and wharf. I'm not sure the definition of a bar. There is I assume he probably means some sort of a freestanding liquor serving, as opposed to a bar at the table. I mean, not liquor at the table. And then he, actually, I find this really kind of an interesting situation, and one that I believe I could get behind. But no amplified music, whatever amplified means. I mean, does it mean an acoustic guitar with a speaker, or does it mean something much more? Or TVs anywhere outside or on the deck and wharf. Behind this might be a concern, I think a very legitimate concern, that the covered wharf dining area in particular could morph into a bar-only operation with crowds, many of whom are probably standing and unrelated to the number of seats per se. I don't know. This could add, I think, to ambient noise problems and parking intensity if you know, a lot of use were made of that. I think we ought to discuss that as a board with the applicant tonight. I could appreciate them not wanting an open air bar there without some restrictions. And lastly, he deals with additional uses, got to receive specific permission from us. Yeah, fine. I mean, we've covered that. We and the applicant agree with that. And the last part of his memo, which some of you probably have not had a chance to read, he's got 5 kind of interesting thoughts about making this site and other related sites more user-friendly, if you will, more safe, but none of them fall within our purview. We can't create special parking for the Silva family. We can't deal with townwide parking issues. They're all worthy. There should be a townwide parking study and capacity done, but that's not our job. And it cannot, in my estimation, be part of a special permit since we don't have any authority. So I'm not dismissive of the merits. I'm dismissive in that last section of his in terms of its relevancy for a zoning decision. That's all. And I think there are other ways to approach that, particularly with the assistance of the select board. So I think the valet parking thing is pretty much taken care of with our additions. I'm against being too specific about what can and can't be included in the site. For two reasons. One, it comes back to us, and two, every time we try to get too specific, we've left something out and inadvertently allowed it. So I'd like to leave it open to common sense. But traffic monitoring, we agree, capacity. The only other thing I'd like to understand then is Tom Sullivan, you or somebody, if your employee, show me on the site plan, Grady's site plan, where the bike parking is. I have no way of knowing whether it's adequate or not personally, but I'll turn it over to my colleagues to ask questions.
Mr. Chittick, this is Adam Brodsky. I'll ask Susan Hoadley to address that, but I just want to speak briefly regarding timing.
Yeah.
We wish to be respectful of the neighbors and have tried our best, but we have been working at this for months. Many, as I said, many of the neighbors' concerns, I think we've already addressed, and some are not within the purview of the board. Again, it was our hope that the board would be prepared to close the public hearing tonight and deliberate with a decision, and that's still our hope. And to continue us for another 30 days because of a last-minute letter from the abutters is not particularly fair. Again, we want to hear from them. We will consider all of their thoughts and respond appropriately, but we probably can do that tonight as part of a working meeting. Again, I don't know where the board is in its process, but I just want to state that.
Okay, well, fair enough, Adam. I mean, absolutely. My intention would be to have a draft decision ready for a vote or modification at our next meeting and close the hearing, and then immediately or within an hour or two go into deliberation and a decision.
Also, I met with.
It's
Mr.
not
Polk.
really to slow it down. I asked Carolyn if we were to close this hearing tonight, feeling that we had all the information we need. What's the time frame? When do we have to render a decision?
Once the public hearing is considered closed, I think we're operating as special permits, right? So when is your next meeting? I know you haven't quite set that just yet, Mr. Chairman. I know there was an earlier date mentioned, I think in one of the continuances of September 6th, but
That can't be because
should
of
be mindful of the fact that there is a
Yeah.
State primary that night, that day. So
correct. No, we
used that
cannot
day.
have a meeting on the 6th, but I think we talked about maybe it was just Cassandra and I suggesting the 13th, the following Tuesday. So the 6th
following
is out.
Tuesday. Okay.
But assuming that the meeting is on September 13th, and we were to close the hearing tonight, do we have that much latitude to wait before we deliberate and then vote on a? We could deliberate tonight, I mean, but still.
Yeah, you could, it's whatever the will of the board would be, where we're dealing with special permits. You could either close the public hearing tonight, begin deliberations, continue deliberations to your next meeting. Either way, you'd be fine.
Also, just to add, I met with Mr. Fulton a couple months ago, and he said him and the neighbors, their biggest concern was the ice cream shop. And at that point, he said, if we take that out, we'll be much happier. And that's when we took the ice cream shop out. And there
Okay.
were not really any other concerns other than have a nice design and all that. Which I think,
Well, the only issue that I truly haven't thought about, and I'll wait for Susan Hoadley to talk about bike parking in a second, has to do with the sort of tail end suggestion that I think embedded as a concern that there be a dining area on the covered wharf, kind of gradually changes to become a quasi full-time bar with increased patronage and and music and football games and things like that. But I don't know. I don't know how the board feels about that one, and I don't know whether I'm sure there is language we could put into this that would indicate that would be a de facto change in use. Otherwise, I don't see.
Too, right? Wouldn't they have to go in front of the Board of Selectmen to get an entertainment license for even like an acoustic guitar, right? Is my understanding.
Okay. So there would be
I'm
some
not-
oversight on that
I'm
one.
not
as well
100%
as-
on it, but I think that's what I've seen at other establishments,
Or at least the places you hang out in, but
I don't see a problem with that. That's,
I think that may be an issue of
But I think the
language,
people,
how we
right?
define it.
Yeah, the people that would be out there would count towards the occupancy, right? Whether, is that how it would work or?
Yeah, I mean, hypothetically, and I'm not asking the applicant to say this would ever happen or never happen. I'm just hypothetically, let's say the fine dining works fine under covered wharf, but there is a small bar area there, in a couple of years, and then all of a sudden the bar is so popular that seats are removed and for more space for patrons. I could see that being a de facto change in use, but I don't know. I mean, maybe food is still served.
I don't know how you
in the
word that,
bar.
but we're fine not to have some sports bar or.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, let's say it becomes a sports bar. I could see that being a concern. I could also see that being handled with language, but as a change in use, I don't know. Carolyn, what do you think about that?
You mean just having like a bar or entertainment out on the wharf area being a change of use?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, you have subtle changes and, subtle changes and then rather large changes.
well, it's to Matt's comment about needing an entertainment license from the select board. He's correct on that. So if there is some kind of live entertainment that, would be entertained, that they want to put out there, they'd have to go to the select board for that. As far as, the bar being out there, the liquor license falls under the select board. And one of the things that the select board needs to define as part of their process is what is the licensed premises? And this is going to be, it might take a little bit of specificity on their part to make sure that the licensed premises is the sit down seating for the fine dining, both inside and outside. Whether that's just done on a seasonal basis, they'll have to delineate what the licensed premises happens to be, so that we make sure we don't have people who are carrying their glass of wine down to the ice cream shop, for example, right?
There is no.
There's no ice cream shop now. There was earlier. Okay, so then they won't be walking around with their glass of wine down and to check out the lobsters in the lobster pound and think about what they're going to buy the next morning. To that point, I don't think it's a change of use as we would typically think about it under zoning, Mr. Chairman.
I think you could define it as you know, similar to beer, when you go eat outside, you can order drinks or wine or whatever, and you're not hanging around outside drinking. So I don't know how you define that in writing, but, and the bar, any bar would be inside and then just brought out to the table. So
Yeah.
it's not gonna be a, you know, a crazy bar scene there. It's, you know, while you're having dinner, you have drinks and wine or whatever.
No, of course, that's not your intention. Let's say though that you decided for who knows what to subdivide, you know, kind of spin off that operation or cut it in half, and somebody else is running the seasonal restaurant outside. And I mean, I don't know. It isn't important to speculate. I think some of it might be covered by the closing hour of 10 o'clock. Most bars I know of don't close at 10. That isn't to say this wouldn't be attractive in summer months from 5 to 10, but you know, it's unlikely to kind of go, you know, if it closes down at 10, it's not going to, it means everybody's off premises.
Yeah.
Just one point, in the plans, there is, as part of the plans, AS 101S, which is the summer seating. And
Yeah.
it shows, you know, it shows 28 fine dining outdoor seats in the covered wharf. And I think if the special permit is conditioned on the plans, they wouldn't be able to remove all those tables and convert it from fine dining into an open, you know, open bar area.
Well, you could also say it's maximum 30 people
Right.
outside at any time or something like that. They cover the seats and the wait staff or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know how you control that. Something like that can just be served with dinner and not a bar would probably be the easiest way.
Mhm.
Or food with drink and not drink only kind of thing.
Correct.
And that's a selectman thing, that's not ours.
Right. But we could
Tell them.
we could condition the use as a food, as a dining
Mhm.
experience as opposed to alcohol only or whatever. I mean,
Right.
there must be some wording that we can put in here that isn't going to be, you know, kind of draconian or ridiculous. But I don't know. Any other? I'd like to hear from David Fulton, who must be in the wings, but I think most of his points are covered in last month's discussion. Susan Hoadley, would you just speak quickly to bicycle parking? I don't think we even talked about it. I'm sure it's in your plan, but
Yeah, I'd be delighted to, Mr. Chair. Can you see a site plan with some
yeah,
red indications on it? Okay, this is a Grady site plan, and we've gone ahead and put these circles in the areas where we have called out for bike racks, each one of which would hold 6 lockable bicycles. Then would hold the larger e-bike models as well as regular standard bikes. And that would give you parking for a total of 18. And it would bring the idea behind breaking them up instead of ganging them together was that when you get large groups of bicyclists like this site will get when Yacht and Sailing Club kids come on their bikes, then you get congestion that could potentially create other safety issues. So we thought breaking it up in this way could address the many different kinds of user groups that will use the site on a bike.
okay. I didn't know what those were, but I can see them now. What's the board's point of view on bikes?
I think this is the thoughtful layout. 18 bikes seems like a lot of bikes for,
That means we can get 54 more seats.
Well, I'm not gonna go there, but
I think a lot of people will bike down there, so I think the spots are great. It's,
yeah, no, I like the idea, and we hadn't discussed it, and I didn't realize it was on the plan, so
Mhm.
18 seems,
I think we could probably even squeeze a few more in.
well, I think some of this project has to be learn as you go. I mean, if you came back to us and said, I want to add 4 more spaces, and here's where I'd put them, 4 more bike spaces. We'd do with that, but I'm not sure some of that we'd have a hearing, but it would be a pretty short one, I think. So I'm gonna go, we're gonna have to, if we approve this special permit, we're gonna have to go with the plans as submitted. I think we just can't keep having,
Yeah, no, that's fine.
modifications every month. Can we, does the board have questions of the applicant and his attorney, Adam Brodsky, at this point, or should we open it up for public comment and suggestions?
I'm satisfied.
I am too. I think we should open it up.
Matt, you okay?
I'm all
Mike?
set.
Yeah, I'm fine for opening it up, Woody.
Okay. So Cassandra, do we know if Mr. Fulton is available?
Yes, I'm pulling him forward now.
Okay, David, you're on. I don't believe you're muted, so you've been able to listen to some of the discussion, or all of our discussion. Our conclusion is a lot of this is already covered by some broader conditions that we're going to place on this application, but you may wish to see us be more specific in instances. I'd like to hear from you on that, and if you think we're off track, we're all big people, so tell us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So over the last month, I've taken a lot of calls, emails, et cetera, from neighbors, really wondering what was going on with the project, having not followed it themselves. And hearing everything from, yes, you had mentioned the wharf, hearing concerns about the wharf becoming a stand-up beach bar where seat count doesn't make a difference when it comes to parking demand. To conversations also about the lobster pond as well. And my approach in all these conversations, and the neighbors and boat owners, etc. We want to be supportive. I think I've tried to make that very clear in the letter. And to your point, a lot of these conditions or restrictions that are written in here in the first section of the memo are really restating what we've heard. However, we're requesting that they become measurable conditions that are enforceable at the end of the day. In general, we do not believe that the 1 per 3 seat parking metric is going to be adequate. You guys had talked in the past about the 10 or 12 offsite spaces. I did hear tonight. I believe I heard it's going to become a requirement. But the reality is, we like the project and the uses. It is back to the main concern that the site cannot park the uses. And we have a compounded issue in the street, which now has really become a level of there's a level of parking demand without Atlantica operational right now that is that demands higher than the parking in the street. So it's starting to become an issue with people making 3-point turns, 4-point turns in the middle of the road, circling to find spaces. So a lot of these conditions are restating, as you had said, the restriction of the property to a maximum of 2 food service uses. I'd suggest that sentence, we can strike the rest of it as you had said, but our understanding is if the plan's going to be approved, that it'll be 2 food uses. And if there's a revision, you know, as you had said, being amended in the future, is the process, you know, through the boards, you know, that's great. But, you know, there is another general concern amongst the neighbors, and that is that this site's been owned by 4 different owners over the last, I think it's been 7 years. So we do understand the intent that Tom has, but we want it to survive if he's to sell the property. It's a challenging site to begin with. It's challenging for you guys to write all these, you know, as you deliberate to write the conditions. So we respect that. You know, the valet parking, you know, we suggested valet parking on site, but also off-site spaces. Bottom line is we put May through September, and we're fine being it all year, but May through September, you know, just because that's what we see as the peak. You know, and again, I've mentioned in the past in the ZBA hearings that Corner Stop is a great example of the one parking space per 3 seats, where it's a real life siloed example, and that parking metric doesn't work.
Yeah.
They currently just about meet the parking bylaw, the 1 per 3 on site. And the owners have told me they have all their employees park off site, and they do acknowledge their customers park off site. So, you know, whatever solutions to that, and we're looking for solutions so that this project can be done. But the reality is they do need to be enforceable and measurable conditions.
I think one of the sub conditions is that, well, 2 really. I think they need to provide kind of traffic, I mean, parking monitoring or administration year round at busy moments and at times when demand is slack, and there will be. It's either during hours of the day or some seasonality yet to be experienced. I wouldn't expect them to have valet parking if you know only 20 spaces are full at a given moment. But the other thing is those spaces have to be, the traffic administrator has to keep those spaces free for patrons, as opposed to sightseers or fisher people or anything else. Otherwise, the plans falls apart. And so I think it's to their advantage. That's an economic advantage in having spaces for patrons.
Yeah, after all this trouble with parking, no one's parking there unless they're in our place, so.
Yeah, well, I mean, it only makes sense. It's dollars in your pocket, or,
Yeah.
and if they're not in your place, it's, you know, dollars you're losing, so.
Right.
And that is part of, so transportation demand management is actually an industry term. I mean, I am held to that in development projects that I do. And that is what you do as an operator on site, you know, to manage parking, but also it's, you know, specifically in here, what we note is, in some instances, we're held to this, where employees are not allowed to park on site or on the street. So that's an industry term that's used. And Woody, what you just actually, you know, outlined would fall under that. A traffic monitoring program by a traffic engineer. I mean, that's another industry term as well. You know, as you guys had mentioned and agreed to as well. The fine dining and seat capacity that we're recommending here is really to get this project going and to phase in the increase in seats. That's the thought, where the 70 seats is what we're suggesting. And I had a bunch of neighbors, you know, suggest this, but methodology wise, if you take 70 seats divided by 3, that's 23 on-site spaces required by the antiquated bylaw. That would give you 12 extra spaces on site. That would give us some buffer if 10 spaces offsite are also, you know, found and confirmed.
Well, again,
And then Tom,
it was written when there was no Uber, there was no Lyft, there's 18 bike racks, there's plenty of walking. The difference between the restaurant you're referring to, they're more remote. This is in the village where 100 people live within a couple blocks. So you're gonna have people walking, biking, Lyft, Uber. We have our own Rivian car. It gets to a point where it's just not worthwhile if we have to, we're not building a skyscraper here. It's a couple little stores and we're not gonna.
I think it's important to keep in mind here that the bylaw may be, as you say, antiquated or inadequate or whatever, but it's the bylaw. And if the applicant is complying with the bylaw, which they are, then they're complying with the bylaw, with the number of seats that they proposed. They have volunteered to go beyond the bylaw to provide the additional employee parking on site. So I think that the thought that it may be inadequate, I can understand, but it's not really something that is within our purview to consider. If the town thinks the bylaw is inadequate, at town meeting, the town will change the bylaw. But until they do so, we don't really have any flexibility.
Oh, and I respect that, fact that you guys are held to enforcing the bylaw. I respect that. And I respect the fact that Tom has offered off-site parking and the shuttle. It's just whether or not after the fact that if it doesn't happen, if it's enforceable, and if Tom sells the property, is it enforceable?
Conditions on a special permit.
Part of the conditions.
Conditions on a special permit go with the property.
Yep. So will that'll actually be a condition?
Which will actually be.
The off-site parking and the shuttle.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, I view that as a positive development over the course of the last month or two, that they have volunteered to, in part, do what address what your concerns are. I'm not sure I can buy into an arbitrary 70 or 75 capacity at this point number for a year. We'll find out when we do our first, and I hope our only, but our first traffic monitoring study. And if it looks like things are, being managed well, there won't be a need for another. If it looks like the restaurants and the other amenities are so popular that there are 300 people there on a given day, we're going to have to address that in a hearing. Yet to be determined, but we don't know yet.
And that's a good solution. And that's also why we were restating what we had heard in prior hearings, just to make sure they're outlined and that there will be conditions as you guys deliberate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there are 6 of us plus town council to go over our wording, and I'm sure we will hear from Attorney Brodsky and others if it looks like we're being too vague or are not addressing these issues. But I believe we are addressing, and if we haven't addressed these issues, they will be in a draft for a final review by the board. Our concerns are yours. It's just maybe what our latitude is and how we would propose solving them.
Right. Yep. That makes sense. The other 2 sections in regards to the wharf bar area, you guys talked through those, and bottom line is, yes, the concern is that becomes an outdoor stand-up bar, and I think I mentioned that, but you guys,
I think we can deal with language
to that. Yep. So the last section, we just do point out that, and I having been in development for 25 years, I myself have been held to do things off-site that aren't necessarily under the purview of, call it the ZBA. It might be under maybe a planning board special permit process or other process, but the reality is, working with the Sylvia family to recreate the 6 spaces. Not saying they have rights to park on the Atlantic lot, but as a neighbor to do that. And the other part of it is widening Border Street. There is an opportunity here to make that. First step would be to make the sidewalk along Atlantica, so that, as you had outlined previously, that there is an actual curb to it, and a granite curb, and it's not a rollover asphalt sidewalk. But the reality is there is an opportunity to do that, and if so, now is the time. The other point is, and this was brought up by a lobsterman, is the lobster pound itself, that space, that area. And, that is seen as the last potential commercial infrastructure to support the lobster fleet. And whether it's and I've talked to Tom about the co-op lobster pound, intentions, which may or may not work. But if it doesn't, that area, becomes in perpetuity either fishing infrastructure or commercial fishing and marine use in perpetuity. And that came specifically from a lobsterman, which I actually thought was a good idea, because he was looking forward, saying the Mill River site is going to be redeveloped. That square footage lobster pound will be lost. And then there is no other, square footage on the harbor that could accommodate the lobster fleet. And a co-op may be a great idea, it may work. But, could the board condition it that square footage in that area is in perpetuity for marine use?
I don't think we can. I think we can deal with what is being proposed.
The market will dictate that.
Yeah. And thou shalt or shalt not forever. I don't think we have that authority. No, not in the way you're talking. I would be correct, I hope, Carolyn.
You can't, that's correct. You can't, in the context of a special permit like this, we can't require specific use in perpetuity.
I mean, if for some reason, let's just say hypothetically, Dave, and this is not, sadly, it's not entirely hypothetical, but let's say the entire lobster population moves north, and in 5, 10, 15 years, there's no more viable lobstering at all. We couldn't, for instance, condition a special permit on there must be lobstering here forever.
Well, commercial fishing infrastructure or commercial or marine use.
We don't even know. It's hard to gauge, the technology, let alone the natural conditions where commercial fishing makes sense or doesn't make sense. I don't want to get, what I mean? We can't. I think, as
Personally, I want
Sullivan
the
said, the
lobster
market will determine.
That's personally, I would want the lobster there. That's one reason why I originally bought the Mill River, because I liked all that, and we can move it over there. And I actually have better access. You don't have a dock at the existing Mill River. You'd have a dock here with potentially, and it's right next to where the lobstermen pull up. So, but if you talk to the lobstermen, they are moving north. They are getting their season cut. So, if it's up to me, it'll stay there forever, but who knows with.
And it may not be, I mean, I don't know, but it may not be, there may not be any commercial fishing long after I'm gone. I have no earthly idea what global warming and everything else will do. So I'd rather leave the specifics to plans that have been submitted to us, and any changes, such as, let's say, it's fishing, not lobstering. Leave that to a change in use, and our successor board will have to deal with that. But I just don't think we should get in the business of forecasting the future in that way.
Yeah. Well, the last request really is direct for Tom, and that is, to work with us as neighbors. I'm involved with the parking committee in town, to look at the entire harbor and holistic solutions. We all just lost the opportunity on Elm Street in the corridor with the select board shooting down the corridor improvements. And that would have created up to 20 to 30 potentially spaces at the Elm Summer border intersection. So, you know, that's going to be an ongoing. I know that's not under your purview as ZBA, but since I have Tom's here right now, just
Well,
going forward.
you know, in a way, I mean, Dave is taken my position on in the bylaw working group. And I think it's an essential, it should be an essential objective of the town to think about parking in a holistic manner. I mean, this isn't the only pinch point in town. The village's parking lot is frequently full, as you know, by 10 in the morning or 11. And on it goes. I think we need something more a broader look at parking. These parking bylaws and parking structures or infrastructure were developed almost 75 years ago. I mean, you know, we had cows in town, dairy farms. I mean, that's not facet of today, and our not only our bylaws, but the available town-owned parking, you know, really satisfied the needs of a 5,000 person town. And, you know, it's inadequate. So I would certainly be willing to get on a soapbox and request that the town take a look at parking writ large. But
Well, Stantec has been hired, but unfortunately, the scope is just the village.
well,
We're trying to amend it to have it include the harbor, but that's an ongoing conversation, you know, that I'll be having on behalf of the neighborhood, but also the parking committee with Tom.
well, these are laudable objectives, and I find none of them offensive or impractical. It's just a question of will, and, you know, can people get behind this and realize the value to the town? But it's not, as you know, you're right to raise it separately, because these are not zoning administration, zoning interpretation issues.
Right, right.
I don't know, we may be, Carolyn, at a point where we could close the hearing and modify my our draft decision for consideration next month. And unless, honestly, I'm not trying to rush anything through. If the board has any other issues regarding the site, its uses, its capacity, its operating hours, any of this stuff, I would like to hear these concerns now, because they can be incorporated.
My only thought, Woody, is that we could close it tonight and have a draft decision next meeting, or we could continue it tonight and have a draft decision next meeting. When the decision gets issued, isn't really going to change the timing of when an actual decision finally gets issued isn't going to change, whether we close it tonight or next time.
Correct.
And given the, you know, the kind of general wide public interest in this, I don't see a reason not to continue and just leave it open. We can close it first thing next time around. But I think making sure that everyone who wants to have any input has the chance to have input is probably a better way to go.
Yeah, I think the public, sorry, I'm jumping in front of the other board members. Dave has articulated a point of view of why we should not close it. Let me just say, for the public that may be listening in, once we close this hearing, if it's tonight, nothing further can be submitted to us, nothing further can be considered. If we close it next month and have a hearing that lasts 5 minutes and immediately go into deliberation, at least it gives us another roughly 30 days, well, a little less, for any further public submissions. I don't think we're going to hear anything further from the, I don't think, Adam, you're going to be prepared to deal with offsite specificity between now and then. This is a project you're working on, and So I'm not expecting new submissions other than those from, maybe points of view from the public.
Mr. Chairman, it's Adam Brodsky. I do have one point to make, and it's really a practical problem I have, which is I need one of the boards to go first and close their public hearing. Because I've been told by other boards that they're waiting for the zoning board to finalize its decision with respect to parking to ensure that the site plan is not going to change
Okay.
any further.
But how does that deal with the point Dave is making? We can close the hearing right now, but there isn't a decision for you to be able to go back to these boards to show them.
But I can represent to the planning board and the conservation commission, which hearings are scheduled between now and your next meeting, that the zoning board of appeals has closed the public hearing and is deliberating and is drafting a decision so that there will be no further plan changes associated with the project.
Mhm.
Over to you, Dave. Your position stands or not?
I don't want to hold the applicant up any unnecessarily. And there has been plenty of opportunities, but we've had, what, 6 or 7 hearings now?
Pretty close.
I think it's a pretty close call, and I don't feel strongly either way. I don't want to inconvenience the applicant, because they have been pretty patient.
Lee, how about you?
Well, I agreed with Dave the first time. Now I agree with Dave the second time. We did have a lot of, I would say, community input tonight, and we did talk a lot about issues, which is my only thing for keeping it open. And it's our policy to keep them open just in case. And I like that opportunity in case anybody came back with any other issues. So I do see that they're getting held up, and I know that they want to move forward. It just seems this would be the first time, I think, in my 4 years that we close a meeting without actually deliberating on the same night. That's my opinion.
Matt Watkins and Mike Dickey?
Yeah, I mean, I'm usually one for process and say follow what we normally do. Like I did agree with probably David's take on it, but I guess in thinking it through, like we didn't get presented with any, site plan changes that would trigger additional comments by the community. And I think we mostly spent tonight reviewing public feedback. So, I wouldn't feel like we were shortchanging the public hearing process if we did close it either.
Mike Dickey?
I think, we've had a lot of meetings. This thing has been looked at from every which way, and there was nothing so radically new tonight that I feel it warrants continuing to kick the can down the road.
Carolyn, do you see any downside in closing the hearing tonight and deliberating and voting next month? Or deliberating over it?
The only thing I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, is there anyone else in the public? I know you wanted to hear from Mr. Fulton.
I'm sorry.
Is there anybody else out there?
Cassandra?
I'm not seeing anybody in the Q&A. Nobody has raised their hands thus far. So it doesn't look like it at this point.
Okay, so with that having been said, Carolyn?
I tend to agree with what some of the members have said, that this isn't a situation where you're expecting the applicant to make revisions to the plans and bring them back to you at your next meeting. The plans are not going to change. And I think you've had plenty of opportunity for public comment as well. So I don't see a downside to closing the public hearing and that your next meeting deliberating and voting.
Okay, and I would say that, Dave, Fulton and his group really deserve a shout out, because I think he's articulated you know, a lot of issues, many of which we have discussed in part or in whole, but this isn't a sort of a one-man memo. I think it reflects some very, you know, considerable thought on the part of many townspeople, or at least affected neighbors. So it's one of the more useful and thoughtful documents we've gotten in a long time. And those issues that we can deal with, we or incorporate, we will, and those that fall outside our purview, we by and large, I have the sense that we would support it as private citizens, at least. Many of these measures, such as signage along, you know, Border Street and all. So with that having been said, why don't I take the very bold move of making a motion to close the hearing?
I'll second it.
Okay, moved and seconded. Woody Chidick, aye.
Dave McMorris, aye.
Lee Darcey.
Michael Dickey, aye.
Matt Watkins, aye.
Okay, so it's closed, Adam. We will deliberate next month. In about 2 minutes, we'll have that date for you approved. And we will have a draft decision that will be circulated to the board for its review prior to that meeting. So we're coming in really deliberating content as opposed to what's our objective here.
Thank you very much.
So you can tell our other boards that we're, well, you know where we are at.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay. So, guys, that's that for that. And big shout out goes to Carolyn too, and Cassandra to a lesser extent, but Carolyn really went through my first attempt at a draft and redlined the hell out of it, and which it needed. So how about setting September 9th as the date of, 13th, sorry, as the date of our next hearing? That's Tuesday, September 13th, 7 p.m. Is that's good for me? Does that present a conflict with anybody?
Not with me.
I'm not aware of anything on my calendar, Woody.
Okay, so I would make a motion to set September 13th as the date of our next meeting. So I've moved it, and
Second.
Dave has seconded. Woody Chidick, aye.
Dave McMorris, aye.
Lee Darcey.
Michael Dickey, aye.
Matt Watkins, aye.
Okay, and Cassandra has been good enough to do another nice job on minutes. That was in my packet.
Mhm.
At any rate, I didn't go through it for grammatical. I went through it for content. I didn't see any issues at all. Could we, can we have one deliberation, two deliberations, to be very quick about it, but I would at least like to make a motion to accept the minutes as written, minus any grammatical changes that we may suggest.
I second.
Okay, so that's moved and seconded. All in favor, just say aye.
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 Which draft decision comes first, Mike Dickey's or Matt Watkins?
I think the way the agenda went tonight, mine. comes
Okay,
first,
Matt, go ahead. Yours are read.
which should be the 46 Hobart one, just as a quick,
Right.
recap. Some grading within the floodplain, pretty minimal in scope to accommodate essentially a plunge pool and some hardscaping. The only recent revision was, we had that question in regards to the 10-foot within the building, which is more of a building code issue. So I did include that when they sent the update as well. to just reflect that slab foundation. But essentially walked through the 9.7H findings, and they were in good standing with each of those findings. Like I said, overall fairly minimal impact, and draft a decision in favor of issuing the special permit.
Anybody have questions or comments for Matt?
I thought it was very well thought out and laid out, and the format was easy to follow. Great job, Matt.
I told Matt earlier I'm going to steal it.
What, you want to do another doc, Dave? Is that? what-
No, I'm stealing Matt's format for the decision. I thought it looked really good.
Yeah. Matt, you got my little comment, right?
I did, yep. So I'll incorporate that into it. And Cassandra, I could send you the final version tonight
That's
or
fine.
tomorrow.
Okay, well, I'd make a motion to accept Matt's decision as edited.
Second,
Okay, moved and seconded. Woody Chidick, aye.
Dave McMorris, aye.
Lee Darcey.
I'm Michael Dickey, aye.
All right, unanimous.
Watkins, actually, Cassandra, the only question I had,
Oh.
and I might have missed it in our packet lately, but I wasn't sure on, I think we converted over to promotions in the Patriot Ledger. We used to almost have like a sheet that just told us what the dates were on that. So I left that blank.
Yes, I went
was
ahead and filled that in for you.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay,
Oh, all right.
okay. Well, let's move to Mike's decision on 103 Border Street.
Did you want me to give kind of a little summary of?
Yeah, why don't you give us a 1 or 2 or 3 minute?
I think it was pretty straightforward. There are two different areas that the draft decision touched upon. The first was a relatively standard, we come across it quite a bit, are the proposed changes going to result in any kind of material negative effect on the neighborhood. I didn't think so, and drafted it to come to that result. The second one was a little different. It was under a floodplain, different section of the zoning board. There, as you may recall, the applicant had kind of had proceeded on the basis that the body of water wasn't tidal, and of course it is tidal. So there are actually some holes in the draft decision, because wanted to have the applicant resubmit as they have done so, but presuming that the applicant, presuming that what they've provided matches up with the requirements for tidal issues, then I think probably I can redraft to come to to affirmative rationale for providing the permit under that different section as well. So that's kind of how it broke out. And I will have to, add in some new, add in additional language, given the new information that came in between when I drafted it and tonight.
Okay,
The only comment that I had is right at the beginning, you misspelled Lubitz.
Sorry about that. I can correct the typo.
It was a bad start, but a great finish.
yeah, I think one of the things I like best about the proposal is that their access into the garage and out of it is going to be a lot safer for the public and for the applicants or the owners than what exists today, which is this, kids' playground slide that you'd go down. God forbid there be any ice on the road or wet leaves. So that alone is going to make it a lot more compatible. And of course, the whole place is, it's slightly, not radically, but slightly, the house is less non-conforming, which is again a plus. They're moving in the right direction. and they're site limited, of course. So, any other changes? I'd make a motion to accept Mike Dickey's decision as it will be amended based on the most recent submissions of site plan, et cetera, and testimony.
Seconded.
Okay, all in favor, Woody Chitik, aye?
Dave McMorris, aye.
Lee Darcey.
Mike Dickey, aye.
Matt Watkins,
Okay, unanimous. I have a question, quick one for Carolyn Murray. There is that one exemption if you've missed a meeting and regarding 46 Border Street. And
Right.
that's been used by Charlie for the June 7th hearing. Do you get a second bite at the apple or do you get only one
You
exemption?
do not. You can only miss a single session of the public hearing. So when you do vote on this at your September 13th meeting, you will have to designate someone else to be a member, the voting member of the panel in lieu of Charlie.
Okay. And to no one's surprise, I suppose, going on the basis of seniority, that would be Matt. But we can cross that bridge when we get there, Matt.
Okay.
Okay. So anything else, people?
Yeah, I have one thing, Woody. I have not actually succeeded you in your position on the zoning bylaw.
Oh, you
revision.
haven't? Okay.
I've not. I really don't have time to do everything that they are asking. I did tell Jack Creighton and Tom Callahan that I'd be happy to review stuff that they are drafting. And also to try to give them, you know, any of my perspective or the board's perspective on parts of the bylaw that need review. I sent an email about this building permit notice problem where the bylaw says that they have to publish it in the newspaper, but in fact they don't. They put it on the website. And I think they're going to address that. I know that parking is an issue that they want to look at. I think some of this, a little bit of the confusion in section 9, the floodplain bylaw needs some review. The substantive things that they're looking at are the issues of what constitutes a way from which you can get frontage to develop. I think there's probably a range of views on that. I would like for anyone on the board who has any ideas about how the bylaws could be smoothed out, brought up to date, made more appropriate, and I'd be happy to pass that along to the members of the committee.
Okay, have drafts been prepared of proposed changes for
Not
review? And
I'm
are they
aware
for
of.
review or not?
Not that I'm aware of. Tom Callahan told me that he would be engaged in the drafting process extensively over the next couple of months. But I also am told that they are working closely with town council in the drafting process. So Carolyn may have a better idea than I do.
Right, I think we just resolved that at the joint select board and zoning board committee meeting. That was just like last week, I believe.
You mean planning board?
No, it was actually a joint select board. Well, there was a planning board discussion where the select board was looking for a planning board to provide a recommendation. But the joint meeting was the select board and the zoning bylaw committee, at
Oh,
least
okay, you
as
said
it
zoning
exists.
board. I wasn't aware that we had met. Okay.
Oh,
got it.
no, sorry, zoning bylaw, the zoning bylaw committee that, the reconstituted bylaw working group. And yes, we have been brought on board, and actually my colleague, who's the retired Chief Justice of the Land Court, Judith Cutler, is going to be taking this on as a project. And I think one of the things she intends to do is if the Zoning Board of Appeals has some time at an upcoming meeting to get some feedback, exactly as Dave was suggesting. I mean, I've been keeping my master list of issues, and I added sections 9.7H versus 9.11 tonight as, things that need to be worked out. Standalone restaurant parking and parking in general needs to be looked at. But, certainly if the board has some time at an upcoming meeting to just go through, your laundry list of things that you wish you could change, that would be a welcome meeting with Judge Cutler.
Okay, I've got a longer list than probably anybody. If it's posted, if I know what the language is, when the language gets rough drafted, I'll know what either addresses my issues or doesn't. I mean, for example, not that we need to spend any time whatsoever on it, but the single lot exemption bylaw 8.3 is pernicious. 8.3 C, which gives a perpetual exemption from the subdivision control law for plans once upon a time approved. And this is a loophole in my estimation. This doesn't deal with the mom and dad's little back 40 lot that they're counting on as an inheritance or legacy for their children. This is been, in my estimation, misused on Windy Hill and a couple of other developments that were allowed to be done 50 years after approval, according to 50-year-old zoning area dimensions. And not to mention the fact that our general area dimensions, I think, are out of whack with other towns and are too simplistic. But I could go on and on. I guess I could start at the front page and move. I'm not trying to be pedantic, but if there was some reference point, and if it's already been addressed or will be addressed, dandy. I don't need to pile on. I would view my role, and Dave, I guess yours as well, are things that aren't really adequately covered today and are not being dealt with tomorrow.
The other thing that occurred to me is more of a policy thing than a drafting thing. And that has to do with that footnote in the dimensional requirements that does the average of the front property, the setback of the two adjacent properties.
Yeah, I think it's footnote 3. I'm not sure, but I think
yes, and we've dealt with that recently a couple of occasions. And I understand the reason behind it. And I think that when there's non-conforming setbacks on either side of you, the average thing sounds pretty reasonable. If instead of 30 feet, you're 20 feet, but when you're 6 inches, is it one of the properties is 6 inches and the other property is 30 feet? I think that starts to get more problematic. But I don't know if something we want to look at or not.
I know some towns have that in their bylaw, something similar. The problem with that is one of mathematics. In your example, let's say I'm the guy that's in between the 6 inch and the 30 feet. And now mine is 15, but there's another house on either side. So all of a sudden it's 15 feet and something else. And even if it's 30 feet, now it's a 22-foot setback. And the whole, it just multiplies and multiplies. And then the 22 and something else becomes another number. And I think that's a one-time shot. I mean, as Matt knows, down in Elm Street, that, and the whole definition of setback there they've also built out into the front yard a permanent structure called a stone staircase and whatever. I mean, it practically comes to the street. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a problem. One of the things I would suggest we each probably have favorite or annoying sections of the bylaw. I've taken it upon myself to look at a number of other towns' bylaws that seem to be like us. I mean, Brookline is not us. Newton is not us, really, of course. But Concord is closer, if you will, and see how they handle some of this. Some of them are as bad off as we are, but some have dealt with this before. And so it might behoove us to, I don't know, deal with things. Carolyn, I've got a general, you mentioned section 9.7 and 9.11. You know, that entire section 9 is really long relative to most other sections in the zoning bylaw. And we don't deal with, I would say 95% of it ever. And by ever, I mean in 30 years. I'm wondering how necessary it even
Okay.
is.
Woody,
Mhm.
one of my past lives, I worked for FEMA. And it was in the 70s, 80s, thereabouts. And that was the time when they were going around from town to town, trying to get towns to adopt regulations so that they would qualify to have their residents be able to buy flood insurance. And they had just, you basically took the bylaws that they wanted to have in your bylaws and you passed them and they flopped into your bylaws and there you go. I think what happened since then is as we've had planning boards and as we've had conservation commissions, that a lot of what went into the zoning bylaws then is now being handled by more specialized boards. But the bylaws are still with the zoning board. And there may be a lot of areas of overlap between what we do and what the Concom does and what the planning board does on those flood regulations. And that may be a good place to look to see if we can streamline that a bit. But I know that there are underlying requirements for the National Flood Insurance Program. You have to have certain bylaws in place.
Yeah, I'm also curious, has anybody ever studied section 14? You don't have to do it now. It goes on for, I believe, goes on for basically 9 pages. We have never, only once in my 35 years have we ever referenced section 14. It's a water resource district, and it talks about certain standards of sludge and emissions and storage tanks and how you measure this and that according to some damn, I mean, it goes on and on and on, and we have never used it. As far as I can see, it has nothing to do, well, it does have something to do with zoning, but it really has to do with disposal systems. And again, I wonder how many towns deal with this issue. My guess is few, but I would defer to others. But if you're a board, look through it and ask yourself whether you need a graduate degree to even administer this. I would suggest yes.
Yeah, Woody, I think some of the question also is like with that 14.
Yeah.
It would seem to me that that is something that the water department would be a lot more interested in than zoning. I think, it's in the zoning bylaw. Does the water department have something similar? Are there overlapping regulations and overlapping bylaws? I don't know. But with a lot of these very specialized areas, there may be other boards that have the jurisdiction already.
Yeah, Carolyn, you don't have to give us a definitive answer, but as a general rule of thumb, would you agree with David that where other boards have primary jurisdiction, why ask us? I mean, for instance, I'm looking at storage of sludge and septic have to be in compliance with 310 CMR 32.30 and 310 CMR 32.31. I mean, for the life of me, I don't know.
I would agree with you both on that one. Yes, absolutely.
And I don't even want to know that if it's in compliance or not. But yes, in that case, I would trust the water department at all. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff here, maybe, and my gut tells me that nobody likes special meetings, but we tend to get loaded up with, real live zoning appeals, and I'd rather have a separate meeting once we have some material to look at or contemplate to give opinions on, rather than try to shoehorn this in, on a meeting at 10 o'clock at night. But I don't know. We're not ready, I guess, yet for that. But that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, it sounded like it's gonna take, I caught some of the select board meetings, sounds like, rightfully so, it'll take some time because I think there's some anxiety with making sure that it's presented right, and that they take their time and kind of include feedback from the right boards and people, so that's probably a good thing.
It's admirable that some people I know want to move quickly, but that could be a recipe for disaster. We could be creating, solving one problem and creating two others for all I know. And I mean, our definitions are not in harmony in a few places, which I won't get into, but I know, so on and so forth.
I think that there is some urgency with respect to like the single lot exemption types of issues that you were talking about, and what constitutes a way, because there's always the potential for more and more development if those kinds of things don't get cleared up. But again, it needs to be done right as well.
Yeah, I don't think it needs a hell of a lot more time as much as a hell of a lot more input and thought. I mean, I could go through, and I probably know the bylaws, dare I say, as well as anybody. I could go through and think I've covered everything, and I'll bet you I've only covered 50% of what should be changed or fixed. Either because, as Carolyn said, we don't deal with it at all, or I've just missed something. So, yeah, let me think, and I wouldn't mind a few thoughts from the board as you go forth the next month. Thinking about whether one way would be to tackle everything that annoys us or seems to be flawed. Carolyn's pointed out some of those. Another way would be to take a look at entire sections, such as 14. You don't have to read 14 all the way to know that that's not really zoning. And it resides somewhere else, and so on and so forth we go. And the large home review in section 5 is ridiculous because there's no administrative enforcement. It's just a kumbaya, supposed to be kumbaya moment where you get the neighbors together and everybody makes suggestions about the color of the clavards, and the person does what they want to do. But I mean, I don't know. But if you think about it, that occupies 60% usually of the planning board's meetings. And it's not a good 60%, not a useful 60%. Now that's a planning board issue, but it's in the zoning bylaws. And there's just stuff we ought to look at and say, I'd start with, what does the zoning board need, or what does the town need out of its zoning board? Then there's other stuff. Is it being adequately covered by other boards or not? Should their bylaws be amended? And I think some of that's being done by the planning board already by looking at ways and, common driveways vis-a-vis approval not required, and which is a technique, a device that's been misused and misunderstood. But
and if anyone does feel that they have the time to devote to the bylaw committee, I'm sure they would love to have someone.
my lips are sealed.
I think everyone's on mute.
That you got that right.
I didn't see any
No,
volunteers. so
I
just
admire the acumen and judgment of this board. That's all I'll say. Okay, guys, what do you say we call it quits for the moment? When anything gets posted, either Carolyn, if you know, or Dave, if you know, I would find it easier to see what's being proposed than to create out of something out of whole cloth myself, but I don't know. I'll give it some thought.
All right.
Okay, I'd make a motion to adjourn until September 13th.
Second.
Second, okay. Moved and seconded. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
Aye.
okay.